Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 245 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. Brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. Check them out at PerformBetter.com. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Renna. The show notes are located on my site at ContinueFit.com. It's where you'll find all my resources, including Strength Coach TV. All right, on the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about a forum thread called Are Perfect Landings Always Necessary? Also talked about kettlebell swings versus hang cleans for overhead athletes. And another thread, Ed Lippy did a thread on his vertical bias. I was just kind of asking Coach Boyle about some of his biases and maybe some of the things he might change. For the Results Fitness University Business and Fitness segment, I continue my little series with Rachel Cosgrove, asking her about how she balances life, business, and the commitment to fitness, including the obstacle course races that she's been doing. For the Functional Movement System segment, I actually did the same thing I've been doing with Results Fitness University Business and Fitness segment, and I am going to get on with Mike Perry. We're going to talk about misconceptions that people have that after the screen, it's all about trying to fix absolutely everything and just doing corrective exercises. So he had a case study that he's doing for the next episode, but I wanted to dial it back a little bit and talk about that. For the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment, Adam Doughty and Tim Robinson are on to talk about some takeaways from the Sport Biometrics Conference that Adam went to. One thing including the tech adoption curve. Interesting stuff. Now remember, the MariGold Bars, hit the gym with a Strength Coach segment. MariGold Bars, high quality protein, all premium ingredients. My favorite protein bar. Check them out at MariGoldBars.com and use the code StrengthCoach10 to get $10 off your first order. Today we got Adam Feit on. He is on to talk about his chapter in the new book from Athletes Acceleration called Complete Sports Training. Adam wrote the chapter on jump training for performance. So I spoke to Adam all about prerequisites for jump training, the 4 foundational body positions, classifications of jumps, volume considerations, his system of zones, and programming. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try it out for 3 days just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. All right, Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Anthony. How are you?
All right, I will remind everybody again in the car, so might have a couple little minor, things, but let's bring it back old times, so we're good.
Exactly.
You, and I think it's interesting. I'm going to bring this up because we have Adam Feit on in this episode. He's talking about his chapter in the new book, in the Athletes Acceleration book that you're in as well, and it's on his part is on jump training. And I brought this up to him as well. And I wanted to, you had mentioned, or Casey Wheel had talked about this on the forum. He started to rethink landings for plyometrics and just kind of practicing this perfect landing, basically because we're never going to see somebody land in a perfect quarter squat position. You disagree. What are we going to do? Practice imperfect landings. But talk to us, expand a little bit more on this, and what are some things maybe that we can do to kind of try to think about what we can do to prepare a little bit better?
Well, see, I think, and this is where I always find it interesting, that as much as people know about what we do, they don't really know about what we do. Because if you look at our plyo progression, we always talk about the idea that we hop forward, we hop medially, we hop laterally. Mm-hmm. So we are doing single leg landings forward. We are doing single leg landings basically going to the outside, single leg landings going medially, going to the inside. And I would say, and I think I used that example in the forum, when we have the kids do them, the younger kids, they don't do them perfectly. But we are trying to do them perfectly. And I think that's sort of fundamentally where the difference is that, as I said, what would the alternative be? Because I think, and we get into this idea of preventative training versus provocative training, it's sort of like someone saying, I really want to condition my MCL, so I squat by knocking my knees together all the time because I want to get that valgus stress and experience it, so I'm going to get stronger from it. I think we've got to be able to look at that stuff and realize that there's a really thin line between being healthy and being hurt, and you have to be careful with that. And so when you start talking, and that's where even we used to talk about like people doing 90-degree jumps and doing things like that. You just can get into that, what I like to talk about, the slippery slope, where you think, okay, did we just go from smart to stupid? Did we make a really rapid transition into something that was not intelligent, something that was trying to be intelligent?
Absolutely. And like you said, you're doing it in all of these planes, right? So you're doing, and we're going to talk a little bit about Ed Lippy's post on addressing the vertical bias, because he was talking about the same idea. And you're going in these other planes, in the transverse plane and in the frontal plane. We're doing the best we can. I like to think too. I know Guido van Ryssen would talk about having different environments for the feet, right? And you talk a lot about there's another thread talking about the barefoot training and having less stable footwear, and those are some of those things that are going to also help towards what we're trying to accomplish with the jump training and the landing, and as well as strength training.
Yeah, because if you think about it, and this is, me, I always sort of go to the other extreme. If you said, okay, we don't want to practice perfect landings, so what are you going to say to somebody? All right, I want you to land and try to go into valgus. Would that seem like a good idea? So I guess what you have to do is think it through. Mark Verstegen used to always use the term. He'd always say, we want to logic train that. And I think I like that logic train idea, and think, okay, then sort of if this, then what? So, all right, we're not going to practice perfect landing. So what are we going to do? We're going to accept any landing is okay? Or are we going to give them deliberately, have them trying to land, jump and land on Eric's mats on one foot, or, hey, try to land in a little bit of valgus, or try to land, on the outside of your ankle. Like what's the alternative to perfect landing? Because as I said, when you're doing it, if you came in and watched, I always use Mark and his friends now because they're my kind of little lab rat group. But if you came in and watched them do single leg plyos, you wouldn't see very many perfect landings. Yeah. But you would see us what we thought a perfect landing was, and trying to encourage perfect landings, knowing that that's not more than likely what we're going to get.
Absolutely. And to stay on the same topic, Ed Lippy wrote an article, or wrote a forum post about addressing his own vertical bias, which came from your article about, timing, max sprint efforts, and also looking at this idea about, some things that, we might not have, we were only in that vertical plane, that vertical vector. And he was starting to do more broad jumps and broad hops. Do you feel like, and you and I talked about this last week, are there some things that you're going to re-examine? And you were kind of hinting at this in that post that, maybe you'll think a little bit more about it, but you still don't love this idea about broad jumps or broad hops. What are your thoughts on this in terms of maybe possibly going into that direction?
Well, I think actually, and I think I posted the video of Mike Vecchione bounding. We did do that, but we didn't go double leg because, and I can't remember who was. I always say the same thing. It's crazy, but I can't remember who said it. But somebody said to me, "You do all this. You're like Mr. Single Leg Training, but you do all these double leg plyos." And I kind of looked and went, yeah, you're right. Why do we do so many double leg plyos? And we know the answer to why we do so many double leg plyos. That's the way we've always done it, right?
Yeah.
So you start to look at that and think, I look at Ed and I think, he's probably half right. And that's where I think this bounds progression idea comes in, because I was very anti-bounding, because we can't bound the way the track people are. We're not reactive enough, and we don't have the strength to body weight ratio to be able to do these sort of beautiful phase 4 bounds that we'd like to see. But as a result, that made us not translate horizontally right to left, because we couldn't bound. And that's where I realized, okay, that's a problem. So now we need to work on bounding and just look at it and say, but by bounding, it can literally be just pushing off the right, landing on the left, pushing off the right, landing on the left. So I think that horizontal vector, we are going to make it more unilateral. And then I actually saw, I don't know if you saw that, I posted or reposted a Twitter video of a soccer team training, and they were doing some plyos. And one of the things that they had done to get the little mini bounce that we use was they sort of went 18-inch hurdle, 6-inch hurdle, 18-inch hurdle, 6-inch hurdle, so we could get that little kind of mini bounce phase of our plyo. So I've been trying that. And I think that's another thing that I may try unilaterally with some of the girls. And I probably won't do it with the middle school boys that I have, because they're not ready. But I may do it with my hockey girls, where I say, okay, here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up hurdles, basically 12-inch hurdles 5 feet apart, and then 6-inch hurdle in between. So we're just going to be like sort of big hop, little hop, big hop, little hop, boom, 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 going through that progression and see how that looks. So I guess the short answer to a long question is yes, we're definitely going to start addressing that, and we've got to look again at our own bias. And I think this fall I've been doing more single leg Olympic lifting with my hockey girls, and starting to look and say, okay, I have to be less afraid of being unconventional, because I think I'm still as unconventional as I can be. I can still be afraid of being unconventional and think, okay, do I really want to single leg clean? Do I really want to do a one-arm, one-leg dumbbell snatch? Those kind of things. And the answer should probably be yes. So I need to figure that out.
All right, good stuff. We'll keep track of that. There was another one post from Mitchell Lamb. You actually haven't seen it yet. It just got posted, and I just figure I like to beat the forum responses here on the podcast. But it was about overhead athletes. He said he saw something on Body by Boyle online, and overhead athletes performing kettlebell swings for power instead of hang cleans. And it was basically due to the risk of potential damage to the shoulders via the loaded internal rotation and the abrupt force of dropping the bar from the rack position. He was wondering, do you feel like, why is that not a concern with other athletes? Why just overhead athletes? And he wanted to know who you consider overhead athletes. So,
one, we consider overhead athletes to be baseball players, volleyball players, swimmers, tennis players. Anybody, I would say anybody's an overhead athlete if they are prone to rotator cuff tendonitis. That would be my category of overhead athletes. So I guess I saw that post and I thought, I don't know if that's 100% accurate, because I would look at, I'd probably be okay with volleyball players and swimmers doing that. And I'd probably be a little less okay with the baseball players and tennis players doing that, because the problem that we get into, again, is the slippery slope thing, and this was one of the reasons that we stopped. Some of our baseball players were cleaning, younger baseball players. They were getting really strong. And then you start worrying, okay, is there some risk of the distractive force of like a 300 clean, or even, the risk, like they were saying, internal rotation, trying to get up into shoulder flexion for that guy. If I could trap bar jump with 65 pounds versus clean with 300, and the benefit would be relatively similar, which distractive force would I prefer? And I guess the biggest thing is I look at and think I think tennis and baseball, there's a combination of hand, wrist, shoulder that probably is a little bit more important maybe than swimming or volleyball. Swimming, you're using your hand and wrist, but not maybe with the same level of intricacy that you might be in baseball or in tennis.
Yeah.
And I think probably similar, swimming more similar to volleyball. Yeah, you're striking with that hand. but the kind of the precision of the strike is not maybe the same as it might be trying to spin a tennis ball, trying to spin a baseball, those sorts of things. So I guess that's one of those ones where I looked at that and I thought, that might be a little bit over. They might have gone a little too far with that. But in general, I would say, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Let's swing some kettlebells. But I'd look at it and think, if someone said to me which one, I'd be like trap bar jump. Some of the younger guys throw those posts up, write them up, put them up. And that's one of those things where that didn't come directly out of my mouth. That came out of somebody else's mouth, sort of interpreting what we're doing.
Okay.
And maybe, so that I think that I'll probably get to that today and maybe have to walk that back a little bit.
Okay, good stuff. All right, Coach, we'll let you go on that note. So thanks for coming on, and we will talk to you next time.
Anthony, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure.
All right, guys, right now, Perform Better, they have their huge holiday sale up to 45% off so many items. Actually, I looked on the other day, 75 items on sale. Crazy. If you're opening a gym, great time to get some equipment. And as well as remember that they have a great facility design team that can help you with all your design needs, not just equipment. They just announced the one-day seminar dates and presenters, actually. New Jersey's kicking it off on January 5th. Rachel Cosgrove, Todd Durkin, and Martin Rooney. You can check out performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. All right, now it's time for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. I'm here with Rachel Cosgrove. Rach, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, we're continuing our little series here. Just to catch everybody up, Rachel's been competing in obstacle course racing this last year, and she made it all the way to the World Championships, which happened a couple weeks ago in October. I had some questions for her because, she's doing this on making a serious commitment to the training and to the events while she's running her business. And so I came up with some questions. Last episode, we talked about kind of drawing that line between being a teammate to your staff and to your employees, being a coach, because sometimes you're being the coach. I said teammate to staff and employees. I meant to members as well. And then, you're being a coach, or you want to coach your members. And then, remember, you're the boss. So we went over that last time. But Rachel, let's talk about when you're doing something like this that, a lot of people might say, look, I'm just going to do a Warrior Dash, which I did, and it's pretty easy. It's not a Spartan race. And you can also say, I'm just going to do the Spartan. I'm not trying for the worlds. So that's obviously a lesser commitment. And it's funny, I always tell people I had to sell my gym to get in shape because, it's hard enough to have time to work out if you don't set things up. But with a commitment like this, I just want to talk about how you manage your time and balance your business and your life and your athletic goals.
Yeah, and I think something like this definitely makes you become ultra, time management becomes very important, ultra important. That's, because you have to manage your time. You just don't have time to do things that are not fitting in with your priorities. And so that's number one, is what are your priorities? And what I've found is that you can only have 3 priorities max. And I actually realized this back when I was training for my Ironman, which training for an Ironman is like a full-time job. And so, starting to realize some of the people I was training with and, really the priorities that everyone had. For if you have say your 3 priorities are, maybe your business, if you are opening a fitness business, or your career might be one of your priorities. And then, relationships, maybe you're in a relationship, your husband, your family, that might be one of your priorities. And then as you take on an athletic pursuit, that would be your 3rd priority. And so I think, any more than that, and you don't have priorities if you get beyond 3 priorities. And some people may not realize that they're spreading themselves, too thin on multiple priorities, on, taking on too much stuff. And so really getting clear on what are your 3 priorities, like currently right now, and they don't always have to be the same, like if you're currently deciding you're going to make athletic, like taking on some competitive athletic races is going to be one of your priorities, then you're probably going to have to drop something that maybe's been, maybe you've been having a great time traveling, or maybe you've been, that might have to go for a little bit while you're really pursuing, maybe you've been partying a lot or whatever your thing that might, may have to go in order for you to take on these athletic pursuits. So what are your 3 priorities? And then saying no to everything else. So really, truly, like if something doesn't fit in with, for me right now, if it doesn't fit in with adding value to my business or adding value to my relationships or adding value to my athletic pursuits. So it's whatever it is that I take on, it's got to add value to one of those 3 things. It's got to help me to accomplish, more in one of those 3 things. And that's really hard to do, to say no to things. And so, it might be that there's, a social gathering that, maybe none of my close friends or family are going to, but it would be fun. But, it's not really getting me any closer to any of my 3 priorities, right? So I'm going to say no to that because I don't have time. Because, even though it might be fun, it's still, I just don't have time. And so really thinking that through, like, are you willing to make those sacrifices and, for your priorities? And then the one thing, like you're talking about, if you are going to go all in and really, make one of those priorities, really, push yourself. And I think I've never really been good at being in balance. Like everyone always says, like, oh, how do you, stay in balance? And I don't think balance actually works. I think in order to accomplish great things, you really do have to go out of balance. And so realizing that of these 3 priorities, if you are going to lean into one of the priorities and really lean in and really go for it, like trying to qualify for world championships, trying to get on a podium, trying to really be competitive, that you have to make sure the other 2 priorities are in a good place and that they're able to support that. If your relationship's falling apart or if your business isn't quite there yet, that might not be the time to really lean in and push yourself competitively. And so really looking at, okay, am I in a good place where my life can support this? And also throughout your year, there can be, where you might lean into one priority and then, at another time, you might really be focusing on your business, right? And so maybe your racing is on maintenance and that's, you're going to race a couple times, but, you're more going to focus on your business for a period of time. And then maybe like for me, I know heading into the holidays, that's going to be total family time, right? Like as soon as I, finish my last race, I'm like, for the month of December, I'm, all about, how much time can I spend with my family and my friends? And so, it's okay to kind of shift around those 3 priorities once you know what those are.
Absolutely. I love that. And I think the saying, for every yes, there's a no. So for everything you're saying yes to, you're saying no to something else. When you're saying yes to going for the world championships, you might say, all right, Layla's gonna, suffer because you can't take her out.
I mean, there might be dirty dishes in the sink. Like it might happen. It's true. Like, and I've had to, and scheduling too, you got to schedule it. Like if I have to get up at 5 a.m. to get my run in, I got to get up at 5 a.m. to get my run in. Like that's, you got to know that if it's a priority, it's really got to be a priority.
Absolutely. Good stuff, Rach. Well, thanks for doing this. We got a couple more questions that we'll get on over the next couple episodes. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun. And if anyone wants to learn more, check out resultsfitnessuniversity.com.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Functional Movement System segment. Today, I got on Mike Perry, and I want to do something a little different because Mike and I were talking about a case study that he was doing, and we're going to get in the next episode. He's going to go over all the details about what he did. So first of all, Mike, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, one of the things that struck me, and just to give everybody full transparency, Mike did recorded for this. And then I was like, wait a minute, Mike, I kind of want to talk to you about this stuff a little bit because, Mike, I think a lot of people get stuck and they have this misconception about the FMS that okay, Mike, you're going to do the FMS and then all you're going to do is correctives with him and you're going to try to fix every little thing that he had a problem. And even if there's 2s, you're going to try to get him a 3s. And talk to us about this misconception about what we get when we get our screen.
Well, so I think one of the biggest issues when people are screening or even thinking about improving movement or implementing corrective exercises, they feel like everything else needs to stop and that we need to fix these things, or you're going to be broken, or that you're going to get injured. But really what we're trying to do with the FMS is find those red flags and figure out what exercises we just don't want to start with right now. And that doesn't mean that even a few weeks down the road, we're not going to hit those exercises. But all we're looking for is those red flags. And if we can try to improve the movements as quickly as possible, that is going to help everything overall. But in the same time, we have a bunch of green lights on a ton of exercises that we can train, and we can train hard. And when it comes to professional fighters specifically, we have sometimes 6-week fight camps, 8-week fight camps, 10-week fight camps. So we are on a schedule, and we don't have the luxury of trying to fix everything. And to be honest, I don't want to fix everything. I just want to take and remove those big rocks. And at the same time, I need to get these guys strong. I need to get these guys conditioned and powerful. So when it comes to the FMS in general, listen, clean up those big rocks, those red flags, and still train. You gotta put the gas pedal down and get these guys in shape.
Yeah, and I almost feel like we shouldn't even say the word red flags, right? Because we're not stopping. Right? It's not a red light, it's a red flag. But it's almost like a yellow light, because and you're gonna go over this whole case study. It's a fighter that you screened. He had a couple ones, and that's where you decided to go. But he wasn't in pain with those things. You weren't fixing pain. He wasn't in pain with what you fixed, right?
No, he had no pain whatsoever. He was just really restricted, specifically in ankle mobility. And he just found that he was like, he even told me, he's like, I feel very limited when I do this and when I do this. And what he was telling me, where he felt limited on the mats, we found the same thing within the FMS. We found that the common denominator for him was just ankle mobility. So all we wanted to do at the beginning was obviously try to improve ankle mobility, and just take the exercises off the table initially that would challenge that ankle mobility. And we'll go over this later, but with the case study, we cleaned that up in a few weeks.
Cool. So basically, you kept all the things that he could do. You didn't stop training. Obviously, he's a fighter, so he's got to keep going with all those other things. But in the gym, you just took some of the exercises that you were worried that he wasn't going to do properly, tried to clean up some of the things that would help him, and then eventually you were going to reintroduce those.
Absolutely. And once we reintroduced those, it was easy. I mean, the transition from, for example, we eliminated squatting at the beginning. So we spent a fair amount of time deadlifting. Now, once we introduced squatting, his ankle mobility was that much better. So squatting was no longer a challenge. Squatting was easy. I just had to give him a couple quick cues, and boom, he was squatting on the first day with load. So it was just really simple to do, but I just had to take those things off the table initially, so we didn't bump up against those restrictions. And he actually even said after we cleaned those things up, he felt that much better on the mat. So it was cool because, within the gym, we were able to improve his deep squat and his inline lunge. But he actually said on the mats, he felt better, taking people down and shooting and et cetera. So it was cool that I obviously noticed it in the gym setting, but he also noticed the way he felt on the mats. And that's exactly what you want.
Very cool. Okay, so here's what we're going to do, everybody. Mike's going to come back on for next episode. He's going to go over the whole case study, exactly what he got on, what he saw on the screen, what the direction he decided to go, the correctives he gave, and then how he reintroduced everything. So, Mike, thanks for doing this.
Thanks.
All right, so everybody, you can go to functionalmovement.com for more information.
Hey, this is Adam.
And this is Tim.
Welcome to the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment.
Yeah, baby.
So I just got back from not so sunny Millbrae, California.
Yeah.
At the Sport Biometric Conference,
Nice.
which is a good time.
Love
What's cool, because we're a company, we don't make human measurement devices or
Right,
anything.
yeah.
We're kind of tangentially related, so we get to sit more on the sidelines and figure out what's going on and what other people are talking about. But we had a lot of great speakers, from pro and elite college sports, kind of like we had somebody from 76ers, the Spurs. We had The Ohio State University and West Virginia. So we had some really top level programs represented and some really great speakers. But really, what's interesting is to look at this and think about the general themes that are coming out.
Yeah, what are a couple of those big themes?
So one of something that I was reminded of that I think everybody forgets about is this idea of the tech adoption curve.
Ooh,
and you can Google that and you'll get a nice clear picture. But
Sure.
long and short of it is that in the population. different people jump onto different technological fads or gadgets at different times. And so you have this one group that's called the early adopters. And those are the people who are like literally like, they heard you're making a thing and they come in and like, hey, can I test it for you?
They're like before the first to market, right?
Yeah, right. They're the ones who want to be like on that thing, like them from day zero and know what's going on.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think it was Lorena Torres is her name from the Spurs. And she was pointing this out and she's like, you know, as you know, pro teams and other elite sport teams, they have an incentive to be at the very cutting edge of this, to get these little, like maybe like marginal benefits of things offering to optimize their processes.
Yeah.
And so they've all turned into early adopters. So it sounds great because you get stuff first, but guess what? It's also a problem because nobody's tested this stuff.
Yeah, no one knows if it works. And the other thing is, the majority of us, right, the sorry people in the sport performance middle class, we feel like we get there on time, but when you're on time, you're actually late or behind the curve, as you would say.
Sure. I mean, yeah, if you're competing against other people in a really tight market, right, you want to be ahead of things and not figure it out when they do. You're like, oh, we're all doing the same stuff now. Great.
Yeah. Yeah, we call that the arms race, right? Cool.
So the other thing that came up that, you know, I was reminded of explicitly, and again by a couple of these speakers, was you know, that athletes don't want to be treated like science experiments.
Ooh, yeah, no. I mean, no one wants to feel like a guinea pig, right? So there's something about hooking something up to the body, and you're just telling the athlete, well, we're going to collect this data, and the athlete's like, well, this is super uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, think about if your phone gave you a message like, Tim, I want to see your eye. Show me your eye.
Yeah, take a picture of your elbow. Like, why?
Why?
Yeah, why? Interesting.
And you know, one speaker was even like, yeah, I've literally had athletes rip stuff off their body and throw them across the room because we weren't sharing data with them. We weren't involving in the process. It wasn't for their benefit. It was for ours. And people resent that, right?
Yeah, they totally do. And I think, you know, we've kind of lost sight of humanity sometimes in sport and in sport performance. And that's dangerous, right? We lose the why. We don't explain things to athletes in full. Yeah. And so they don't have much perspective, you know, and in all reality, it's about them, right?
And I mean, this comes back to, you know, I mean, when we say when you're going to collect data, like you should use it to reinforce your relationship with the athlete.
You got it.
And those are themes that came up over and over again with these speakers with things like trust and relationships.
Super cool.
Hey, that's going to do it for us today. Go to trainheroic.com to start your 14-day free trial. When you're talking to one of our representatives, be sure to tell them the Strength Coach Podcast sent you for 10% off a year of the Pro or Elite Edition.
All right, now it's time for the MariGold Bars Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach. Today's segment, I'm Adam Feit, and Adam is the Assistant Director of Performance Nutrition and a Level 2 Master Coach at Precision Nutrition. He's a former partner and Director of Sports Performance for Reach Your Potential Training, RIPT, that he did with Bobby Smith. Before that, he was an Assistant Strength and Conditioning Coach and Nutrition Coordinator for the Carolina Panthers. Before that, he was the head sports performance coach for Eastern Michigan University. Obviously has a nice, diverse background, has authored a couple of different things through the Athletes Acceleration Program, Complete Guide to Training the Female Athlete, as well as the Complete Jump Training. And that's what we're going to talk about today because he authored a chapter in the Athletes Acceleration book, Complete Sports Training, just came out, Speed, Strength, and Conditioning for Today's Athlete. So, Adam, thanks for doing this.
Wow, Anthony, I appreciate the extensive intro and finally having the opportunity to connect. It really means a lot. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. It's like I said, you've been on the radar for so long, and I was waiting. I thought I had you when you did the jump training DVD, but then 2 weeks before I had Bush Next Nighter on talking about the same thing. So I had to pause it. But now we're going to take a real big deep dive into jump training for performance.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. So let's get going. Here we go.
All right. This might be a dumb question, but I kind of was interested in just calling it jump training. I know, we get a lot of people say, oh, I do my plyos, or, they'll throw it into the power category. You called it jump training. Why are you calling it jump training? What's the difference?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing that up. I think what really echoed for our message was we wanted it to be very clear for all levels of coaches. And, if you've been in the field for a number of years like we have, you can obviously associate jump training with plyometrics. But, when we break things down to the fundamental level, you can do jumping exercises, but they're not necessarily like a short response plyometric drill, like a depth jump or a depth drop to a long jump where you really have that short amortization phase. And my time at RIP, the 5 years that we had together there before I had moved on, was we were seeing a lot of, lack of a better term, a bastardization of plyometrics in regards to, let's say, they were summer programs or, high school coaches just kind of doing what they saw online or, watching YouTube videos. And so we wanted to be very clear with the intention of, plyometrics may be very catchy. It sounds very scientific. It kind of just rolls off the tongue. And when coaches are signing up, let's say players or parents are signing up, their children for training, in centers like ours at RIPT, we wanted to make sure that the message of what we're trying to do is train them in jumping exercises to, obviously improve performance, but really reduce the risk of injury. So, to kind of wrap all that together is we didn't want to overwhelm our market, and we wanted to make sure that our language and how we approach our system could be taken upon at a middle school coach, a physical educator, a high school coach, and whatnot.
I love that idea too, what you did that. I'm actually listening right now to If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? It's actually a book by Alan Alda, and it is really about the communication and talking about how, really those things, like when you say plyometrics, people they look at you like, what are you talking about? Like I have so many people that I've trained in the past with my golfers who, they were just coming to the gym as adults for the first time. They never did any of this stuff. So when you say the word plyometrics, they're kind of jump training. Just you kind of get they're going to understand at least have an idea what's coming.
Yeah, and I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, these subliminal messages or influences over the years. I remember Coach Boyle writing an article years ago. I believe it was about talking coach.
Yes.
And, this is something now, I'm doing my PhD back at Springfield College with my wife. And, we've got a nice mentoring position with our own graduate assistants. But, again, it comes back to, well, the sport coach doesn't want this, or, we're not getting the support on top of this. And we always go back to what coach had said about, do they understand what you're trying to do? So if you're going to throw out the latest terms of, from Science and Practice and all of these DVDs and triphasic manuals that are, overbearing our industry right now, how can we break it down to the level that everybody will understand?
Absolutely. Well, let's break it down. Let's take a step back in terms of, plyometrics really is something that's taking advantage, of the stretch shortening cycle, right? So can you kind of just give us an overview for maybe even some of the young coaches and maybe just a refresher for some of the other coaches? Because even with some of the older coaches, they've, like you said, kind of bastardized some of this stuff, and they're missing out on really, truly taking advantage of what this is supposed to do.
Yeah. So, if we were going to break it down at the base level, there's a lot of power. There's a lot of speed of movement that can occur if we appropriately use, what we have, and that's our body weight. And I think that's what really stemmed the reason for doing this manual, because everybody's writing about, a maximum effort or a high intensity training cycle to elicit these types of qualities. But we tended to forget about what we always have with us at all times, especially as athletes. They're going out on the field with their body. So we wanted them to be masters of their body weight. But, if we can get them to properly load their body and get them to, eccentrically stretch the muscle and adequately prepare them for a powerful takeoff, we're going to be in great shape because, not getting into too much of the physics of the movement science stuff, but obviously we're going to have some elastic energy there that's going to be stored. And if we can facilitate that quick enough and safe enough, we're going to get some really great results in terms of power, performance, and production. And so, by using that stretch shortening cycle, that's going to help us with everything. That's going to be helping us with jumping higher, jumping farther, and running faster. So, if I can clear all that dialogue up and explain to them, why, and, one of the analogies we actually use is, at RIPT, we train primarily female athletes, and there's always hair ties. There's hair ties everywhere. And when parents would come in, I would say, okay, here's kind of where we're at right now with, let's say, your child. And we would do a performance assessment test. So, I use the analogy of like, let's take this, we're using the hair tie, which is really a rubber band, as the muscle. And I said, I'm going to pull back this hair tie and I'm going to hold and I'm going to wait and I'm going to take my time, and maybe we're going to open up a conversation and talk about the weather or politics or whatever it may be. And then I'm going to let it go. And let's say that hair tie goes about 5 yards. But if I can improve that rate of contraction, I can get them strong enough, I can get them to produce force quicker. I'm going to take that hair tie, I'm going to bring it back like a slingshot and snap it right away. And then all of a sudden, literally, that hair tie goes 10 yards. It goes 15 yards. I said, the problem is right now in their development as a young athlete, this is kind of where we're at, is we have great intentions of jumping high and jumping far and moving fast, but we don't have the eccentric strength to control our body. And we can't kind of flip the switch where we can go right into that concentric movement. And the amount of looks that you get when they're just like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. Right then and there, we knew that we had something that was worth producing for a lot of people, not just involved in strength conditioning. And this was really a manual for everybody out there.
Absolutely. You talk about that eccentric control, and you do say in the book, jump training should serve as a foundational element of power training before any external loading can be applied. Do you have any prerequisite in terms of, we have heard this before, well, now there's some old school prerequisites that people might still, be listening to out there, but do you have any prerequisites in terms of, okay, before we get into jump training?
Well, quick tangent, that actually just drives me nuts because those topics come up all the time still about, squatting, 2.5 times your body weight. And, I'm looking at my son. My son's 6 years old and I'm coaching a soccer team with my wife. And it's just like, they're jumping, they're hopping, they're bounding, they're doing all of this stuff. And like, there's no way that these kids can be doing it, right? So obviously I know that's to an extreme, but for us, we didn't want to put a number or a percentage on one of those because, obviously being in the private sector, you're going to see your kids hopefully for maybe half the year. You're hoping that there are still some dual sport athletes out there that aren't exactly specializing yet. And so we just brought it back down to, fundamental movement patterns is, can we control our body weight? And what are the body weight movements, whether I'm doing an isometric hold or I'm doing some sort of eccentric lowering, that I'm going to be able to transfer to that. And then we started looking at the jumps. We started looking at our, let's say, winter and summer programs where we were getting 250, 300 plus people in there and watching them. And then, the foundational movements that always came back was the hinge movement. And so we started looking at it and saying, okay, how is their RDL? How is that? Because we're going to use that in our hang clean. We're going to use that in our hang snatch. We want to make sure that they can bend and appropriately load the hips. And then we started looking at single leg. And then that's where we started getting into, well, that's great. We might be, doing really well with our strength movements. Well, what happens when we add some speed? And that's kind of where the whole snap down movement was born, because a lot of us, and, we were guilty of it too, is we were saying, okay, great. Got great double leg RDL strength for the RDLs. And we got great single leg strength for the single leg RDLs. Now we're going to do all this advanced stuff, but we weren't adding the speed element to it.
Love it. So that is where you kind of came up with your 4 foundational body positions to make sure, and that would be the double leg athletic RDL position, the single leg athletic RDL position, and then the double leg snap down as well as the single leg snap down. So just give us an overview. Obviously, everybody should understand the RDL positions, the single and double leg, but go into a little deeper with the double leg snap down. I did YouTube it. I did not hear of that before, and it's a pretty easy concept.
Yeah, so I don't really know where the actual term came from. It's obviously been a lot of influences from us. I worked with Joe Ken, which I think he would call like hammer down. I had spent some time working with Eddie Greer, who is now with the Los Angeles Rams. And we were at a conference up at Rutgers at one time, and he started addressing it. And he may have called it something different, but that's essentially what we wanted to do, is we want the athletes to snap down into a fast RDL, because what was happening, especially with a lot of the jump types of exercises, so, the hops, the bounds and whatnot, they were, if it's in a counter movement fashion, the ending position of that counter movement, so whether that was the arm swing, whether that was, pushing their hips back, the ending of that movement was automatically the start of the next movement of the jump. And almost all the time, especially working with young athletes, it was a disaster. And so we looked at it and said, oh man, they've got great RDLs. Their hips are going back. Their knees are slightly bent. Their chin is tucked. They're excellent right there. The single leg obviously is always a challenge with any type of athlete, because you've got the, rotation of the hips, you've got valgus of the knee, and you want to get that, stability of the hip musculature taken care of. But once we started, okay, let's go into jumping, it was exactly that. As we were watching these slow, strength-dominated RDLs, not really transfer over to the speed of movement in, let's say, a box jump or a tuck jump. And so we really started looking at it. And when we added that element to the progression of our jump training, it slowed things down immensely. But we saw the movement quality of the sessions. We saw the risk of injury obviously go down. And we just felt better as coaches. Like when parents and coaches were visiting us, we knew we had our stuff dialed in because there were no knee collapse. There were no chest falling down. There were no kids hopping and landing 5, 6, 7 times to stabilize themselves.
Yeah, I like it, dude. It's funny because when I saw that, I used to do that. I first learned that move, believe it or not, for in Strong First, learning the kettlebell swing.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
After you practiced your RDL, there was just that idea, like that's how this quick snap that you're gonna make with that with the hip hinge. That's exactly. So I've done that, like just like they would say, like sweep through, just kind of like go over your pockets, right? And it's so kind of similar to what you guys are doing. Very cool. So let me ask you this though, because we actually had a question on the forum by one of our members, Casey Wheel, and he was talking about, are practicing perfect landings really that necessary? And I guess he felt like, after watching a ton of volleyball and basketball clips, you never see anybody really land in a perfect quarter squat position or even land on 2 feet. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Oh yeah, we got some intensity coming in here. So I think an argument like this can be applied to anything, right? Why are we going to deep squat when, let's say, because I work with volleyball as well, we're never going to be in that deep squat. Yeah. Why are we going to only do power movements, for the first exercise of the day? Because, we're going to ask our kids to be powerful and explosive in the fourth quarter. So I can see that absolutely. And I think that's where it comes in with systematic training, because you are going to want to do, these micro doses of, hey, you're not always going to land with 2 feet at the same time, right? You are going to have to jump continuously under fatigue because that's going to be the specificity part of the sport. But when you're in a position like us and you're working with kids that are obviously going through a crazy time of transition in terms of motor development and learning and growing through their bodies and trying to figure out how to use all of these appendages that just keep extending out, is we are here to lay the foundation. And that was something that we took immense pride in about, we're sending our kids hopefully to college programs. And I think one summer, I think it was, our third summer when we really started taking things to the next level, we had over 40 kids in our pre-college program that were going to college to play sports. And one of the best things we always hung our hat on was when the colleges and their coaches would email us or shoot us an Instagram message or Twitter, feed. And it's like, they know how to move. They know how to land. They do everything. They are my demo coach. So when I'm going over a movement, they're the one I use. And that was great. So I can totally see that point with anything, right? But you can use that with, let's say now we're going into the NFL combine season. Why are we training maximum strength on the bench press? Because it's a 225 rep test. Well, if we improve the reserve, we enhance the capacity for that 225 to be a lower amount of that 1 RM. So they're going to be able to do more reps. So, it's 6 here, 6 there, half a dozen of the other. Everything is context specific.
Good. Yep. Nice. Well, let's talk about, and I think this is one of the most important things that as coaches, we really need to truly understand, because we talk again about language, and you classify the different jump types as, the four different categories: jump, hop, bound, hybrid. Can you just go over those 4?
Yeah. So this was, a revision of what Coach Boyle had done and, looking at his work over the years. So we were pretty comfortable knowing that, jumps were obviously going to be 2-legged takeoffs with, the same 2-legged landings. So these would obviously be like your vertical jumps, your long jumps, your box jumps. What we had seen, just like a lot of the coaches on the forums that, when they would say hops, oh, I'm doing hurdle hops. Well, our hurdle hops, are they done with 1 leg? Are they done with 2? Do we just associate hurdles with hopping and not jumping? And so all of a sudden you create this issue with obviously the nomenclature of, well, if I'm recommending a hurdle hop and I think it's with 1 foot and it's a 36-inch hurdle, I don't even know if they make them that high unless it's a track hurdle, but, we're setting ourselves up for injury. So we wanted to just say, especially for our coaches in our intern program, as we were getting new interns every year, we wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. This is what we label things here. this is how we're going to do things. So that way, if you have to cover a class or you have to move somewhere else or you're off site training a team, we're all doing the right thing. So jumps were going to be the two-legged takeoffs with two-legged landings. The hop was going to be the one-legged takeoff with the same one-legged landing, which can be every revision of the jump. So instead of a long jump, we could do a long hop. Instead of a box jump, we could do a box hop, and so forth. The bound would essentially be jumping from one leg and then landing on the contralateral leg. So that could be the lateral bound, that could be the rotational bound, that could be the linear bound that you normally see in track and field. And then the last piece was the hybrid. And I think this was kind of obviously any combination of, doing a jump or a hop or a bound. But really what we liked about it was the amount of space that it removed from doing all of these types of jumping exercises, because I was guilty of it. We'd set up all the hurdles for all the hurdle jumps for a college group. And, we got like 8-10 sets of, 4 and 6 sets of hurdles out there. And that's taking up like half our turf. And, like turf space is prime time space. And we don't want to waste that if we need to get other groups in there. So the hybrid was born from how can I combine maybe a jump with a hop or a bound with a jump? And how can I add maybe an upper body plyometric exercise or, some sort of medicine ball drill to help me, get the entire package of upper and lower, as well as the planes of motion. Because, I spent most of my career in football strength conditioning. I felt like everything was geared towards, well, how high can I get my vertical and how far can I get my long jump? And when you're looking at injury, right, a lot of them are going to happen in that eccentric plane or the rotational plane, and we're limiting the amount that we can move and stabilize. So we focus on single leg training. Well, let's do that from all dimensions. So that's kind of where the hybrid was born.
And you feel like this is the most important one, right? When you work with youth athletes, I feel like it's just so athletic. It just develops that athleticism.
Yeah. So really what was most important that we looked at was it's such a good transition between like double leg and single leg exercises. And, I was going through it, the ranks of being a strength conditioning coach, and it was just natural. You're just like, okay, cool. I'm going to do double leg hurdle jumps, and then we're going to go to single leg. And then maybe I'll do some lateral and medial. And then, hey, if I'm getting crazy, maybe I'll do some like L jumps or, 90-degree hops. But to improve like their efficacy, so their belief in their ability to accomplish that task is we were just literally going from 0 to 60. And by throwing in the hybrids, now we could say, hey, we may not be ready for, let's say, a hurdle hop with one foot, but I want you to produce as much force as possible with one foot. And then I want you to land with two, because maybe we're just not ready for that single leg landing, or maybe we're not ready for that single leg takeoff. And so by kind of mixing and matching, and we figured out a system, with certain types of athletes and certain types of sports, we were able to do that. And then, it also gave us a ton of variety. I think that's what's great too. When you're programming group after group, team after team, year after year, I won't lie, it kind of feels like Groundhog Day sometimes. So, if you're in the private sector or any college or whatever it might be, you have a 3 o'clock group, you could be coaching an 8 o'clock group, and it might be your 8th, 9th group of the day, but it's their first time being there at that time. And so this was a way for us as coaches to kind of, add a little variation with simplicity without changing the entire thing.
Absolutely. And let's segue that into the importance of multiplanar jumping. And for me, first of all, I really started to get on this concept when I, visited Todd Wright down in Train for the Game and went to his mentorship and started to do more things multiplanar, including the the jumps and especially working with golfers. I think I realized the importance of some of these transverse jumps. I think we still don't see enough of that in people's programs. But you also, one thing that I kind of threw in, you have 4 different, what you call, am I pronouncing this right? Foci of motion?
I believe it's foci. Yeah, okay. I like that.
All right, nice. Where it's, they can include vertically, linearly, laterally, or rotationally. I kind of threw vertically and linearly in the same category, almost as a sagittal plane movement. Talk to us about how you broke this up a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, you pretty much covered it in terms of, are we going to have a vertical focus where obviously we're trying to jump as high as we can? Are we going to have a linear focus? We're going to try and jump out as far as we can. Are we going to have some sort of lateral focus where we're going to try and jump as far and as high as we can from side to side? And then the rotational piece obviously is, changing direction there. But, when you talked about you would just group your vertical and linear together and put that in a sagittal, we actually did do that in our 2-day-a-week program. And that's really like what was happening was we watched the industry, we watched the type of kids that we were getting. And I'd love to say that, hey, a lot of our kids trained 4 days a week. Well, they didn't, unless it was like a pre-college program in the summer and they had to get in shape. And so we looked at that. Then we looked at 3 days a week. And I mean, I would say over 90% of our kids were doing 2 days per week of training because they had SAT prep, they had all these other activities, they're specializing in sports. So when we looked at it, we said, all right, what's the max amount of days that athletes will train with us in the summer, especially in the weight room, because this is where we're doing a lot of our jump training work before lift. And it was, the 4 categories. And then we said, okay, on what days are going to be the best focus? And then we just started splitting them up and, kind of taking like a little bit of a top-down approach and saying, how could we organize this best? And so, but where it really came from in terms of all the dimensions, I mean, just as much as I do, athletes are going to push, pull, flex, extend, rotate, twist, pivot, punch, jump, land in all directions. And I think the weight room tends to just, kind of be pretty dominant in its own planes and as well as like, running. And so we're not just training track athletes. You can't just run straight and lean left. And so it's like, how can we mix in the dynamics of the sport as well as where they are in their training age to really create the complete athlete?
Absolutely. And talk to us about the considerations for volume, because you have a different, seemed like, well, when I read that, you had a different take on, we always had this idea about only foot contacts, and that's what people were measuring. Talk to us about how you're monitoring the volume.
Yeah. So when I was going through the ranks of, student to intern to graduate assistant and head and, going into the private sector and all that, it just baffled me that we were still kind of recommending plyometric sessions. Like, hey, for your session today, you should have 80 to 100 jump contacts and then 100 to 120. And, I would look at things on the internet and I would go on the forums and, well, this was an intense drill, this was medium intensity. And I just kept looking and realizing that there's just so many variables here that are affecting it, right? We've got short response, we've got long response, we've got direction, we've got the height of the box. We could never come to an agreement of like how high is too high. I remember, reading horror stories of kids doing like depth drops off garages, or getting, things like that. And so I use, like any good coach is you do more of what you're good at. And I had a really great background in using the Prerequisites method of, doing reps and sets because, it's said that, in the 70s, Prerequisites was a researcher in the Soviet Union or Bulgaria, somewhere in the Eastern Bloc. And, he spent all this time analyzing weightlifting journals. And then, he would just, like any great coach, watch the sport and see what happens. And then he would notice that obviously that, hey, they're only doing X amount of reps at X intensity range until the bar speed slowed down. And for me, that just clicked because I said, here we are in strength conditioning. We're doing the same thing roughly with Olympic lifts, right? We're very rarely going to go over 3. And if we are, it's probably going to be, for some sort of complex work or technique, updates. But yet we're prescribing sets of 10 on box jumps, or we're prescribing sets of 20 on hurdle jumps. And if we go back to the premise of, why are we doing plyometric training or why are we doing jump training? It's obviously to produce as much force as quick as possible. We want that elastic response. And we weren't getting that in the traditional guidelines, I felt at the time. So, I just kind of blended the two. I married it in terms of, hey, this is what we're doing to create explosive strength with Olympic lifting maybe. And, we would carry that over to your traditional resistance training. And it just made sense. And from there, we took the categories, we color coded it, and we looked at, all right, well, what is a zone 1 jump? And maybe that would replace my dynamic effort work in the weight room. Or what would be my max effort weight work, over 90%? That would just simply be, what is the most ridiculous, absolute craziest jump combination I would ever have my athletes do in terms of height, in terms of speed, in terms of direction? And we just came up with a system and tried to refine it so we can make this an easier process for everybody.
Yeah, well, let's go over that system. Let's go over the different levels, because I think you've done an amazing job, because I think too many times people, and I think you even said this in the book, we know they're going week 3, they're jumping off the garage in the gym and they're trying to do all these fancy things. So talk to us about the different levels and just some samples of what kind of jumps you're talking about.
Yeah. So when we looked at it, we obviously wanted to relate it back to, the Prerequisite chart in terms of, all right, we've got lightweight to heavyweight. And then when you look at the chart, you look at in terms of obviously at a lighter weight, this is the inverse, relationship between intensity and, duration of, all right, if it's a little bit lighter, if it's a little bit easier, I can do more of them. And so, we classified it essentially from zone 1 to zone 4. And, zone 1 would obviously be kind of the easiest type of jumps. And zone 4 would be the hardest. So we would be able to do that accordingly. So, if we were going to go through it, zone 1, we wanted to make sure that we weren't doing anything over, let's say, like 6 reps per set. And these would really be the foundational level jumps. This is when you talk about true jump training, these are the fundamentals. So these might be the snap downs themselves. These might be the depth drops from the box. This might be the box jump itself. So we wanted to keep it there on that zone 1 for that to really master that double leg position. So we're not getting any type of, craziness in terms of jumping off with one or switching or whatever it might be. So we really wanted to maximize, like, let's get you in a great position.
Yeah. How long will somebody typically be in? Obviously it depends on training age, but for the most part, when you see your athletes, you're going to send them in zone 1. What are you roughly putting them in for?
Roughly. So what we did with our programs at Ripped were we built it around the school seasonal schedule. Mm-hmm. So, most of our programs were about 12 weeks. So what we saw is a lot of the athletes would be anywhere in a zone 1 jump, let's say 3 to 4 weeks for our high school groups. Obviously, once we started reaching to the middle school market, they were doing primarily zone 1, but those would obviously extend up to like maybe 6 to 8 weeks. And then as you were a little bit more advanced, we might even go to like every like a 2-week rotation. So, we kind of borrowed some ideologies from, let's say, Westside Barbell with the max effort rotation is like, hey, we're going to do this for 2 weeks just to kind of get you acclimated to this is what we're doing. And then we're going to speed up the progression process a little bit quicker.
Zone 2, talk to us about zone 2.
Zone 2, we're going to look at now we want to start maybe adding a little bit more planes of motion there. We're also going to ensure that we have a little bit more short response. So when we're looking at that in terms of the multiplanar, this is where we might combine, like you talked about earlier, Anthony, with like vertical and linear. So this could be like a vertical jump to a long jump. This is where we really start introducing the hybrid. So we wanted to make sure we did that because an athlete, let's say it's an in-season program, they can only come in maybe one time. So, we'd have to say, all right, well, what's our bang for our buck exercise? How can we accomplish this accordingly? We're also going to spend some time into, some single leg work. So we're starting to introduce that a little bit more because, again, a lot of people will just rush from double leg to single leg. So this is where we'll start to introduce some of the single leg there. And then obviously as drills get, a little bit more difficult, we're going to drop down the volume and, not expect them to do, multiple reps, obviously under fatigue. But, we're going to cut down our volume from, 18 to 30 to maybe 12 to 24 reps per set as well.
Absolutely. Now, you say that zones 3 and 4 should be reserved for advanced athletes. So before we get into that, talk to me about what you consider advanced in terms of, are you basing it off of what you're seeing in front of you, or are you basing it off of what their goals are, what their sport is? Talk to us about what's that prerequisite before they get into 3 and 4.
That's a great question. For us, it was a lot of observation. We wanted to make sure one of the easiest things we looked at in terms of like ground contact time. And so, there's a lot of things that you can do with that. If you had like a just jump mat, now at the college, we're looking at things like, reactive strength index and explosive strength deficit. But when you're in that group coaching dynamics, what does that transition time look like? When I do a vertical jump, I land from that vertical jump and I go right into another jump. And you coach enough athletes and you watch it enough times from different angles. If it's slow and it's not as explosive as it should be, chances are that, we're still going to hang back in that zone 1, zone 2 and really work on that eccentric strength and stability. So for the zone 3s and 4s, for us, it worked out in terms of like a training age model. A lot of our zone 3s and zone 4s were reserved for, let's say, our athletes going into college. we did a lot more of that with our college athletes and, even obviously our professionals. But that's not to take away, zone 1 and zone 2 from them, because when they would come back, let's say it was a holiday break program, we were always greasing the groove and going back to that. But for us, we wanted to see how do they respond to a multiple short response, kind of a quick and stick type of coaching cue. And we wanted to see that reflection. So whether we're doing a multiple jump test, like a 4 jump, or we're doing a triple jump test, a triple long jump test, what does that look like? How fast are they getting off the ground?
Absolutely. Good stuff. So give us just an overview of zone 3 and 4.
So zone 3, we're looking at really the elastic component is, anybody in zone 1 and 2 can jump once, can maybe jump twice. They can jump super high. They can jump super far. But are you able to jump that? So are we going to have some consistency with those jumps in between? So, as I said earlier, we're going to look for a little bit more multiple response. We're going to throw in multiple hurdles. So that could be what we call like a repeat 3. So they're jumping 3 times in a row and then into something. And this is where you see a lot of that traditional plyometric, terminology of these types of movements where you're getting that active stretch and you're, unleashing the kinetic energy right away. So, we're looking at that. And then the external resistance piece was always unique for us because, we'd be on the internet and we'd be scoping out different types of things or maybe seeing what our competitors are doing. And, the first thing we always see is like, oh, let's just hook them up to the Vertimax, right? Like, let's just, chain them, chain them down with extra rubber bands. And, they're landing, their knees are caving in, their chest is dropping, they're super slow off the floor in between. And it's like, what is the point right here? So for zone 3, we might start to introduce a little bit of the external resistance there. For that, it was more of a stable resistance. So, that could be a weighted vest. That could be, having plates with us, because a lot of them were just, we're watching it happen and unfold. And we wanted to make sure that we're taking our time with that. So, obviously with that, we're going to have a low amount of foot contacts there. And then, really zone 4, this is where we had a lot of fun as coaches, I think, because we started doing some things like complex training and some contrast work. So, whether we're pairing it, let's say a squat with a vertical jump or a hang clean for that matter with, vertical jump testing. This is where we start to tap into like, all right, let's see what we can do. How can we use this potentiating effect between the lift or between the jump and have a good time with that? And then, we're going to make sure that we do some sort of, advanced hybrid work. So, it wasn't uncommon for us to start doing some, vertical hops or, let's say a jump as high as you can on 2 feet and land on 1, because like you said earlier, that might very well happen. When you're looking at layups, like how many times are they going to land with 2 feet at the same time? Or if you're spiking in volleyball, right? Or you're coming down from a kill, like a lot of these things we have to consider. So we just wanted to take our time progressing that accordingly.
Absolutely. Let's talk about programming considerations now. So how you're really, what are some of the things, again, that you're thinking of now? Everybody knows your system now. We just went over the whole system. Talk to us about how you kind of would think about, programming.
So I always think of, outcome-based decision-making. What is the outcome that I want to come from this? And so, we would test our athletes, we would track their vertical jumps. We would track their long jumps, but obviously we know they're not going to improve every single season. That's our goal, but there's a lot of factors that come into play there, especially with, their attendance for that matter. But, if I'm going to program accordingly, I would set this up on a macro level. So like, hey, what's my seasonal plan? So for us, we always knew it was about 12 weeks in the fall, 12 weeks in the winter, 12 weeks in the spring. And then we always had like, our summer program is really a shortened version for our high school kids. So that was 7 weeks. So you got to know obviously how much time you have there. And then from there, how many days a week are you going to train? We believe that you should have a little bit of, what's important every day. I think Dan John talks about that, right? Like if it's important, you do it every day. So for us, it was jump training. We're not going to go out there and bring them to the field and do 150 jump contacts and say, call it, because I'm pretty sure that 149th jump is not as high as that first one. But if I can accumulate 100 jump contacts throughout the week, or let's say I'm doing all zone 1 jumps and it's 30 per day, I'm going to get some good quality work there. So am I doing 4 days a week? Am I doing 3 days a week? Am I doing 2 days a week? And, then there I pick the types of movements I'm going to do. So let's say it was a 4-day a week program. I'm going to do some sort of vertical or linear, maybe on day 1. If it's day 2, I'm going to throw in some rotational work in there because, it's not as fun. It's not as flashy. Kids are going to fall a little bit, but it's important when we're changing direction. Day 3, we might do lateral. And then whatever we didn't do on day 1, we would just complement on day 4. But, deducing down into like that 2-day-a-week program, we just found that, hey, we're going to do some sort of vertical with a linear or a combination there, as well as a lateral, because when we're looking at, maximum performance or just, transfer to what we're trying to do in the weight room, those were always like our top 2 go-getters.
Absolutely. Good stuff. What are some things that, you feel like when you see some of the plyos out there, and, you've talked about some of that throughout this podcast, but what are some things that you kind of feel like, if you're going to advise coaches on this jump training program, what are a few of the really big rocks you're going to tell them?
The first thing I'm going to tell them is not to get caught up into what their sport is requiring them to do. And I see this a lot at every level is, well, they're going to jump like this. The joint angle is going to be like this. They're going to have to do this, they're going to have to be ready to jump 300 times in a match. And it's like, possibly, but if we're not laying the foundation of how to jump one time, great. We're just going to constantly ingrain like bad motor patterns there. So, obviously become educated and know that, what we're doing in a sports performance facility isn't exactly what they're going to be doing at practice, especially when you're looking at in-season models, right? So, if you're an in-season program on the field, you're doing probably a lot of high velocity work. You're probably doing a lot of low range of motion. So we want to counteract that is we want to be able to find the right puzzle pieces there. So, first thing I would say is don't get caught up in the whole sports specific thing. Pat Livesey, one of our coaches who's still at RIP now, just wrote a great piece on that in terms of, are you making this sports specific or are you making this athlete specific? And then to kind of build on that is, how can you apply, the whole standard deviation here, right? Like what are most of your kids going to benefit from most? 68% or whatever the values are in stats class right now. So I'm trying to tie in some of that and not blow my brain around. But, what are they going to benefit from? They're going to benefit from landing mechanics. They're going to benefit from jumping high. They're going to be benefit from jumping far, and probably some single leg work there too. And, probably to tie it all in is like, how is this going to fit into your program? If it's important, you're going to make sure it gets done. And you can see this in, let's say, things like neck training. You can see this things such as, let's say, core training, however, or conditioning. Where you put it in your session is going to make a real difference into what your athletes think is important as well as what you are. Because if it's important, you'll find a way. And so if that's getting strategic with the warm up, like in our program, we would do a plyo prep section to kind of get the nervous system ready to go, but then we would do it right after our speed, whether it was linear, lateral, multidirectional, and that we used that as a CNS primer for the Olympic lifts. So that worked out great for us. But if you're finding ways that like, I really want to do it and I can't fit it in, well, it's not important to you right now, and that's fine. There's periods of the year that jump training probably should kind of take a back seat. But if you're slow dosing it and you're spreading it out, some element of that should always be there. So I would say don't get caught up in, what you see, what you read, what you think is best. Know your athletes, know the teams, know the coach and what they're looking to do, and find a way to organize it effectively. Because there's nothing worse than, saying you're going to do all these jumping drills, you're doing them, and you're just going from exercise to exercise and nobody's coaching it. Is have a plan in place.
Good stuff. Well, I can tell people right now that you don't need to worry about a plan because he's already done it for you in the Jump Training for Performance chapter in Complete Sports Training put out by Athletes Acceleration. There's other chapters in here too. His former partner, Bobby Smith, Coach Dose, Patrick Beath, Coach Boyle, Will Fleming, Lee Taft, lots and more. So Adam, thanks for coming on and talking, giving us really a full deep dive into your chapter and into Jump Training. Great stuff.
I really appreciate it, Anthony. And then, for any coaches, if you are still listening, I'd love to hear from you. I've had some great conversations with, private school coaches, high school coaches, middle school physical educators on how they've adapted it, what they would change, what we would add. So I will probably say this right now, this may not be the only version you see in the future. So if we can continue to connect and coordinate, great ideas, we're only going to push this field further and better. So thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 245 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, you can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days. Just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Access that offer. Go to StrengthCoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. Special thanks to Chris Parr and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, they got their huge holiday sale up to 45% off so many items. One-day seminars coming up January 5th, starting in New Jersey. Rachel Cosgrove, Todd Durkin, and Martin Rooney. Check out PerformBetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Adam Feit for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning and performance enhancement. Thanks to Adam Doughty, Tim Robinson, and Train Heroic. Head over to TrainHeroic.com. Start your free 14-day trial. Guys, you got to get into this online training. If you're not doing it, you're crazy. Let them know Anthony sent you. You'll save 10% off your first year of Train Heroic Pro or Elite Edition. Thanks to Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at ResultsFitnessUniversity.com. Mike Perry and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at FunctionalMovement.com. And thanks to MariGold Bars, high-quality protein, and all the premium ingredients. Grass-fed protein, gluten-free, organic ingredients, non-GMO, no preservatives, low sugar, and they taste amazing. Use the code SHRINKCOACH10 to get $10 off your first order at MariGoldBars.com. My name's Anthony Randa. Go to ContinueFit.com for all my resources, including Strength Coach TV. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.